Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video, I want to take you into chapter 8. Now, this is the bioenergetics chapter, and there's also exercise metabolism in here. But what I'm directing you towards is page 234, 35, and 36. Now, there is a getting technical box that is really, really helpful. I want you to read that on page 237. But the point of the video is to help you to understand, because I did get a question from a student related to acetyl coenzyme A, lactate, lactic acid, and how all of these things fit together. It's actually pretty simple as long as we highlight the main components of the systems we're talking about: glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation, the electron transport chain. So I want to just try and simplify and explain it as best I can, as I did to help this one student. And it basically starts on page 234, where the explanation of glycolysis occurs. Look, from a testing perspective, the goal is to understand that anaerobic or glycolysis in the anaerobic phase it occurs inside the cytoplasm of the cell without oxygen. So it's not like oxygen is all over the place inside a cell. No. Oxygen is carried by particular molecules inside the blood, right? Red blood cells. It's called myoglobin in muscles. And so it's the myoglobin in the muscle cells where you have the exchange of hemoglobin, oxygen-carrying iron-rich molecules in the blood. So the hemoglobin in blood passes the oxygen into the myoglobin inside the muscle cell, and is ultimately able to provide oxygen to the mitochondria that are located inside the cell itself. But the question that I was asked was, how does this all relate to these different terms? Because the student had never heard the term acetyl coenzyme A, and most people haven't until you start reading it. But acetyl coenzyme A is sort of, now a lot of folks will say that ATP, of course, is the energy, right? Is the fundamental energy unit. And it is, right? ATP, fundamental energy unit of life on Earth. The end goal for living systems is to produce ATP, which is going to functionally fuel and keep the energy production up for, again, living systems. So where does acetyl coenzyme A come in? Where does lactic acid or lactate come in? How about glucose and pyruvate? Well, if you read through these pages, NASM actually does a pretty good job of explaining it. Let me see if I can help you in a very simple way. It's the consumption of food that ultimately will get broken down through your digestive system, go into your blood system. Some of it will pass through the liver. Some of it will stay in the liver to be converted into other molecules. Ultimately, for us as personal trainers, we're looking at muscles, and muscles obviously need ATP, but the production of ATP occurs through these different pathways, these different systems. The first one that we generally talk about is what's known as the glycolytic system. Now, I'm not talking about ATP PC system. Forget about that. I'm just trying to help you to understand this part of it, where we have the conversion of glucose ultimately into other usable molecules and ATP. So carbohydrate consumption will bypass that system of digestion. But ultimately, once you get glucose into the blood system, the glucose will be transported to muscle cells. Insulin will help assist with the movement of the glucose molecules into the muscle cell. The muscle cell itself, or the cytoplasm of the muscle, is where you will see the occurrence or the initiation of breakdown of glucose into ultimately ATP. But there is a byproduct. When there is not oxygen, when there's no oxygen present with this process occurring, okay, you will get some ATP, but you will also get a byproduct. So glucose, the glucose molecule is made up of 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. So C6H12O6 is the chemical signature of glucose. Well, that gets split. Enzymatic activity will split that into, right, 2C3H6O3. You'll get 2 of these guys. They will be quickly converted, and there'll be an exchange of, again, some enzymatic and molecular activity that will provide a couple of ATP and the byproduct known as pyruvic acid or pyruvate. So at that point, this is the interesting part about this. This is the glycolytic system, but there's 2 types of glycolysis. There's anaerobic glycolysis, where pyruvate will get converted because there's no oxygen. Anaerobic without oxygen. This is where the anaerobic activity will take place, which is very simple. It's bingo, bam. Your pyruvic acid or pyruvate will get converted into what's known as lactic acid, quickly gets converted into a molecule that we now use in this terminology, which is lactate. Okay. Anaerobic glycolysis, bam, you hit the wall. That's it. You get a couple of ATP, pyruvate, pyruvic acid, boop, right into lactate. Lactate gets shuttled out of the muscle, goes through the blood system. By the way, some of that lactate, just so you know, is actually utilized by type 1 muscle fibers. There's a couple of interesting things that actually occurred. Don't get into it. You're not going to be tested on that. But the point is that once that lactate is produced as a byproduct, you will then see that movement of lactate to the liver, and the liver basically just reverses the process. Lactate gets reconverted back into glucose. Glucose goes back into the blood system. It's actually pretty cool when you think about it. So the muscles extract a little bit of ATP. Boom, the byproduct is lactate. If there's no oxygen, as there's no oxygen in the cytoplasm per se during this glycolytic process. However, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the activity that is occurring here is occurring near or at the mitochondria, meaning the outside membrane of the mitochondria. Well, if there's oxygen there, which there is, if there's oxygen, well, that process of moving pyruvate to lactate actually gets diverted. And this is where the interesting stuff happens. That pyruvate does not get converted into lactate. With the presence of oxygen, you actually have the pyruvate or pyruvic acid now being shifted over and converted into what's known as acetyl coenzyme A. That is your currency. That's the real currency substrate. Does that make sense? You got glucose. That's great. Glucose is just one way to get acetyl coenzyme A. So let me explain this simply. Acetyl coenzyme A is the main currency for the production, long-term, high-efficiency production of ATP, because acetyl coenzyme A is the, how should I say it? It is the sort of the bridge. It's the gateway to aerobic or oxidative phosphorylation. You get what I'm saying? Anaerobic glycolysis and glycolytic system, very quick production of ATP, but very little. But ultimately, for the long-term production of ATP, for the normal production of ATP in our cells, in our muscle cells, we're talking about muscle cells in particular here, the consistent production of lots of ATP with very little substrate starts from acetyl coenzyme A. So acetyl coenzyme A really is our common currency that's going to produce long-term ATP production. And so that's kind of the point here. And that's what I was explaining to this one student. So acetyl coenzyme A is that molecule that ultimately is going to move through what's known as the citric acid cycle. And then ultimately we have other byproducts of the citric acid cycle. I'm so used to saying the Krebs cycle. It's the same thing. My college when I went to school for this, which was 100 years ago, we used the Krebs cycle. Then it became the carboxylic acid cycle, and then now they use correctly, by the way, the citric acid cycle. All three names are for the same exact cycle that occurs inside on the outside peripheral membrane of the mitochondria, and then on the inside of the mitochondria itself. And by the way, just so you know, they did some good shots here with their figures and their pictures. When you go on to page 236, again, mitochondria, I would say read these getting technical boxes that they have. They're very interesting. They're very helpful to explain this process. The point is that it's the acetyl coenzyme A. And you got to start saying that word over and over and over. Say it over and over, because that is the true currency, because glucose is the currency that's used in anaerobic glycolysis. However, we have other ways to get ATP from other substrates, right? Not just eating a potato that has starch, and those starches will ultimately get converted into glucose, right? We also eat proteins, we eat fats, we have obviously alcohol, we have other substrates that ultimately create or are used in these different cycles to produce ATP. Glucose is the one that we see in anaerobic glycolysis, but it's the aerobic glycolytic system where we have the conversion of pyruvate into acetyl coenzyme A. That's what opens up this world of ATP production, because it's in the oxidative phosphorylation cycles. So the citric acid cycle and the electron transport chain that we see the vast amount of ATP being produced. And this is where the consumption of fats. So fats ultimately, and by the way, let me look. There you go. So figure 8.7, fat, carbs, and proteins, right? The three main macros. When you eat fat, they get converted into free fatty acids, not glucose. Not when we're talking about the production of ATP. Free fatty acids will be converted into acetyl coenzyme A through beta oxidation. You can see the arrows, and I'm just helping you out to try and understand this. If there is some issue with trying to understand what's going on here, the fat you eat, or the fat that's contained in your fat cells, right, subcutaneous fat cells, if they're pulled out, broken down into the free fatty acids that they will be broken down into, those free fatty acids, when they are brought into a muscle cell, right, to get to the mitochondria, because that's where this occurs, those free fatty acids can get converted, broken down, enzymatically converted into acetyl coenzyme A, which was, I just said, the currency. That is the main currency. It's the same thing. It's the same thing with amino acids. Now, not that your body likes to use amino acids, because it likes to. It doesn't. If your body doesn't have to, it's always going to go for fat and glucose, carb-based substrates. So proteins will go through what's known as deamination, right? Deamination. And so that deamination will do the same thing that the free fatty acids do. They go through, and in this case, it's actually called the urea cycle. But the point is that deamination will create acetyl. Look, 8.7, figure 8.7. Everything gets converted into that common molecule called acetyl coenzyme A. Part of what I want to do is get people to appreciate, and let's boost acetyl coenzyme A, right, a little bit more in our field. Everybody talks about glucose, right, and lactic acid and all this other stuff, but really it's acetyl coenzyme A that is the power, the power behind the production of ATP. Acetyl coenzyme A goes through the citric acid cycle. There is some ATP. It's funny because the citric acid cycle, or Krebs cycle, it's called turns of the citric acid cycle. So every turn, the citric acid cycle produces two specific molecules, high energy molecules, and some ATP. Ultimately, the vast majority of ATP, up to 36, right, ATP per molecule, believe it or not, of if you've got glucose, that comes from the electron transport chain, or we call it the electron transport system as well. But I'm hoping, because that's it. That's the end of my explanation of that part of it. It's really fascinating. It's a fascinating system. It really is. And even though you're probably not going to get tested a lot on this information on your NASM exam, I do think that it's a really important part of being a personal trainer, is understanding some of the, the foundational elements of bioenergetics and energy production. And it makes you sound smart too when you don't explain this to your clients. By the way, if this was helpful, and you did understand what I went over, then just type the word understand in the description box. You can actually catch that link that'll take you to the exam study materials. We have an entire course on the exam study for this 23 chapter textbook. Every chapter in our exam study course has an audio video component to it. Quizzes, we have practice exams, we have entire Quizlet study sets for each chapter. And so NASM has given you a lot of resources, right, in their textbook. But you really want to be able to pull it all together by going through the Body Design University NASM exam study course. So just let us know how we can help you out with that. Keep in mind, we do a live study every Wednesday night, 6 p.m., 6 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And by the way, if you like this video, give us a like. Make sure you subscribe, and if you can, go over to the Facebook page because we have a private NASM exam study group. More than welcome to go ahead, get in there, and actually access the community that we have created of over 10,000 students studying for their NASM exam. As always, have a great week. And if we can be of assistance, just leave a comment in the comment section below. We'll see you next week. Thanks.